This video goes over finding the equation of a straight line from its graph. As part of a GCSE maths exam, you can be asked to find the equation of a line given its graph. The equation of a line is always in the form of y equals mx plus c. M is a number, it's called the gradient, is the coefficient of x when y is the subject. The gradient represents a measurement of the steepness of the line. C is also a number. It's called the y-intercept because it is where the line crosses the y-axis. So the y-axis intercepts the line at that point. You will need to complete this process in 2 steps, working out the gradient first, then finding the y-intercept, and finally putting it all together. This is what it looks like. To find the gradient, you need to first identify 2 points that are easy to read on the graph. So here I have chosen the point 1, 1 and 2, 4. Why? Because they are clear and neat on the graph. Once you have chosen these 2 points, you can then draw the lines going upwards and across to connect the 2 points. So to go from point 1 to point 2, if you want, you're going to need to go up 3 and across by 1. So your gradient is going to be change in y over change in x, 3 over 1 equals 3. We now have a gradient. Part 2, which on a graph is the easiest one, is to read the y-intercept. So this is where your line crosses the y-axis. So on this example, we can clearly see that the line crosses the y-axis at -2. This means that your y-intercept c is equals to -2. You have m, you have c. You can then put them back together, and the equation of your line is going to be y equals 3x minus 2. Here are 2 examples that we are going to do together. If you wish to start and have a go first, then pause the video now. Okay, so our process. We are going to need to find for each of this line an equation in the form y equals mx plus c. So for each line, I'm going to start by finding the gradient. I choose 2 points that are easy to read. That is an easy point. I follow the graph, and the next easy point I find is that one. I connect the 2 points by going up for my change in y, so I need to go up 1, and I need to go across by 4. This means that my gradient, m, is the change in y, 1, over change in x, 4. In this case, a quarter. Part 2. I now need to find the y-intercept, which is where the y-axis intercepts the line. In this case, the y-intercept, c, is going to be positive 1. The equation of a line is y equals 1/4 of x plus 1. The gradient can be a decimal, it can be a fraction. It's better to keep it as a fraction rather than a decimal. Example number 2, same process. I'm going to choose 2 points that are easy to read. And you could choose any point. You could choose where the line crosses the y-axis. You could choose points that further along. Just make sure they are easy to read. So in this example, I'm going to choose that first point at 1, 2. And if I follow the line, I could choose 2, 0, but I want to show you that actually, if I choose one that's further along, the gradient is still going to be correct. So I've chosen my 2 lines. To go from the first to the second point, this time I'm going to need to go down, in my example here, by 4, and then across by 2. So my change in y is going to be down 4, my change in x is going to be across by 2. So the y-intercept will be -4 over 2, which is -2. And you can see that if actually I had chosen to stop at 1 and then go across at that stage, my gradient would be -2 divided by 1 I would get the same value. So the points you choose make no difference. Part 2, I need to find the y-intercept. The y-intercept is where the y-axis intercepts the line. So in this case, at 4. So the y-intercept here is plus 4. I have gotten the two elements. I can put my equation together. Y equals minus 2x add 4. A word of warning. Every now and then, questions about equations of lines are set in context. So this is an example of an old Edexcel question. I'm going to show you here the examiner's report, and you may pause to read it, but in summary, when such questions come up, candidates tend to answer them very badly and struggle with them because they don't tend to understand clearly what needs to be done. So if you wish to read this, then pause the video. Right, so here's what's expected from you. If you have a question like that, just read the context first. So it's about the distance traveled by a car for different amounts of petrol used. And it's not surprising that the more petrol you use, the greater the distance you can travel. So A, you're asked to calculate to find the gradient of a straight line. You're going to do the same as before. However, here it's much harder to find clear points to read. So do not just draw little triangles like that and try to approximate, because the thinking is correct, but you're going to make such an error in the accuracy that you're going to lose your accuracy mark. You are better off aiming to use both ends of the graphs. So here, if I use my change in y, and I can't use a ruler here, so my change in y is going to be all the way up, and the change in x is going to be all the way across. When you do this in an exam, use a ruler. So what's my change in y? I go from 0 to 400, so it's an increase by 400. What's my change in x? Well, I'm going from 0 here to 10. So my change in x is plus 10. The gradient is therefore change in y is 400 divided by change in x equals 10. Your answer will be 40. If you have very small triangles, you will get your method marks, but you're likely to use the accuracy mark if you don't have 40, as it's very clear here you can work at 40 precisely. And then you have a part B of the question. In part B, you ask for an interpretation of a gradient. Interpretation is not describing the calculation. Interpretation is, what does this number of 40 mean? And in this example, 40 is the change in y divided by change in x. So this means that your y is going to increase by 40 when x increases by 1. Then put that in context. So this tells you that for every extra gallon of petrol you are using, you will be able to travel an extra 40 miles. Interpretation means you have to explain this in context. Now is an opportunity for you to practice this skill a little bit more. You have 4 lines here, but quite straightforward. So practice the process of finding the equation in the form y equals mx plus c. Pause the video and have a go. Here are the answers for each of the lines. Note that the gradient can be positive or negative. It can be an integer or it can be a fraction or a decimal. And also note that the y-intercept can be 0 if it passes through the origin. Finally, one more of these exam questions that's a little bit tricky set in context. This is a question from November 2020. Pause the video and have a go. The solution to this final question is here. So watch out to use a big triangle to avoid an accuracy error, and remember that the gradient is changing y over changing x. give an interpretation of the gradient in B and an interpretation of the y-intercept in C. This is 4 marks.